I remember the way the morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, painting golden stripes across the floor. I was standing at the sink, hands deep in soapy water, humming a tune from my childhood. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. It was a day like any other, or so I thought. I had no idea that by noon, the world I'd built would be shattered, and the person I trusted most would be the one to break it. The phone rang, sharp and insistent, slicing through the calm. I dried my hands on a dish towel, heart fluttering with that familiar mix of anticipation and worry that comes with motherhood. I glanced at the caller ID, my daughter-in-law, Julia. We'd never been close, but I'd always tried. For my son's sake, for the family's sake. I pressed the phone to my ear, forcing a smile into my voice. "Hello, Julia. Is everything all right?" Her tone was clipped, businesslike. "Can you come to the office? There's something we need to discuss." No warmth, no small talk. Just a summons. My stomach tightened, but I told myself not to read into it. Maybe it was about the quarterly reports, or the new client I'd brought in last week. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my purse, and locked the door behind me, the click echoing in the empty hallway. The drive to the office felt longer than usual. Every red light seemed to last an eternity. I tried to calm my nerves, reminding myself of all the years I'd given to the family business. I'd started working there when my husband was still alive, back when the company was just a dream, scribbled on napkins and late-night conversations. I'd poured my heart into it, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and sometimes even my own happiness. I'd done it for my son, for our future, for all of us. When I arrived, the receptionist barely looked up. The air in the office felt different, charged, tense. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step echoing louder than the last. Julia was waiting for me in the conference room, her arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. My son, David, was nowhere to be seen. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat, smoothing my skirt, trying to steady my hands. She slid a folder across the table. "We're letting you go, effective immediately." For a moment, I didn't understand. The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. "Letting me go?" I stared at her, searching her face for a hint of kindness, a sign that this was some terrible mistake. But her eyes were cold, unreadable. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Is this about the budget? The new client? I can fix it, whatever it is." She shook her head, her expression unmoved. "It's not about your performance. We just feel it's time for a change. The company is moving in a new direction." I felt the room tilt, the walls closing in. My breath came in shallow gasps. I thought of all the late nights, the sacrifices, the moments I'd missed with my grandchildren because I was here, working, building something I thought belonged to all of us. I thought of David, my son, who should have been here, who should have stood up for me. But he was silent, absent, leaving Julia to do the dirty work. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. "Does David know about this?" I managed, my words trembling. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, her gaze unwavering. "This is a decision we made together," she said finally, her voice flat. "A decision we made together." The words echoed in my mind, each syllable a fresh wound. I felt a hot flush of shame, as if I'd been caught doing something wrong, as if I was being punished for loving too much, for giving too much. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to beg for mercy. But I sat there frozen, my hands clenched in my lap. She pushed the folder closer. "There's a severance package. You'll have to clear out your things by the end of the day." I nodded, numb. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked out of the room. The hallway seemed longer now, the faces of my co-workers blurring as I passed. No one met my eyes. I reached my office, closed the door behind me, and let the tears come. They fell silently, hot and bitter, soaking into the papers on my desk. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to hold myself together, but the pain was too much. I packed my things in a cardboard box. Family photos, a mug my grandson had painted, a stack of thank you notes from clients. Each item felt like a piece of my life being stripped away. I moved slowly, as if in a dream, my mind replaying Julia's words over and over. "Letting you go. A new direction. A decision we made together." As I walked out of the building for the last time, the sun was still shining, but the world felt colder, emptier. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the office I'd helped build from the ground up. I thought of all the years I'd given, all the love I'd poured into this family, and wondered how it had come to this. I drove home in silence, the radio off, the city passing by in a blur. My hands shook as I unlocked the front door, the house greeting me with its familiar quiet. I set the box on the kitchen table and sank into a chair, the weight of betrayal settling over me like a heavy blanket. I tried to make sense of it, to find some reason, some logic, but all I could feel was the sting of rejection, the ache of being cast aside by the people I loved most. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I replayed every conversation, every moment, searching for signs I'd missed. I wondered if I'd been blind, if I'd ignored the warning signs out of hope or stubbornness. I wondered if I'd ever truly belonged, or if I'd always been an outsider, tolerated but never truly accepted. As the hours passed, the pain gave way to something else, a cold, quiet resolve. I didn't know what the future held, or how I would pick up the pieces. But I knew one thing. I would not let this betrayal define me. I would find a way to reclaim my dignity, to rebuild my life no matter how broken I felt in this moment. The day everything changed was the day I began to see the truth, not just about Julia or David, but about myself. And though I was lost, I was not defeated. Not yet. If you had asked me a month ago, I would have told you my life was full, if not perfect. I had a place in the world, a purpose that gave shape to my days and comfort to my nights. My son, David, was the center of my universe, the reason I'd worked so hard for so many years. When he was a boy, I used to tuck him in at night and whisper promises about the future, how I'd always be there for him, how we'd build something lasting together. I never imagined that the very thing we built would become the wedge that drove us apart. The family business was more than just a job to me. It was a living, breathing extension of our family's story. My late husband Mark and I started it in our garage, back when we had nothing but hope, and a willingness to work ourselves to the bone. I remember those early years, long nights spent poring over ledgers, the two of us huddled around the kitchen table, dreaming of a better life for David. We celebrated every small victory, every new client, every hard-won contract. When Mark passed away, I threw myself into the business with even more determination, determined to honor his memory and keep our dream alive. David grew up in the office, learning the ropes at my side. He was a quick study, eager to please, always looking for my approval. I taught him everything I knew, how to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to treat employees with respect. I wanted him to understand that success wasn't just about numbers. It was about people, about loyalty, about doing the right thing even when it was hard. For years, it felt like we were a team, two halves of a whole, carrying on Mark's legacy together. Then Julia entered our lives. She was beautiful, ambitious, and sharp as a tack. David fell for her almost instantly, swept up in her confidence and charm. I tried to welcome her, to make her feel at home in our family. I invited her to Sunday dinners, included her in family traditions, even gave her a key to the house before they were married. I wanted to believe that she would be the daughter I never had, someone to share in the joys and burdens of family life. At first, things seemed to go well. Julia brought fresh ideas to the business, pushing us to modernize, to take risks I never would have considered on my own. She was efficient, organized, and unafraid to speak her mind. I admired her drive, even as I sometimes felt overshadowed by it. There were moments when I caught her watching me with a look I couldn't quite decipher, part curiosity, part calculation. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, that it was only natural for two strong-willed women to clash from time to time. Still, there were signs, small, almost imperceptible shifts in the way things worked. David started coming to me less for advice, relying more on Julia's counsel. Decisions that used to be made over coffee in my kitchen were now discussed behind closed doors in their office. I found myself left out of meetings, my input no longer sought or valued. When I asked David about it, he assured me it was nothing, that he was just trying to take some of the burden off my shoulders. "You've done enough, Mom," he'd say, squeezing my hand. "Let us handle things for a while." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that my place in the family, in the business, was secure. But there were moments, quiet, lonely moments, when I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. I'd walk into the office and find Julia at my desk, rifling through my files, her expression unreadable. She'd look up, smile that tight, polite smile, and say, "Just looking for the Johnson account. Hope you don't mind." I'd force a smile in return, but inside a knot of unease tightened. The staff noticed the changes too. People who had worked with me for decades started coming to me with questions, concerns, whispers of discontent. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Harris?" They'd ask, their eyes darting nervously toward Julia's office. I'd reassure them, telling them not to worry, that every family goes through transitions. But I could see the uncertainty in their faces, the way they hesitated before speaking, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. At home, the tension was more subtle, but no less real. Sunday dinners became quieter, the conversation stilted. Julia would sit at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her eyes scanning the room like a queen surveying her court. David, caught between us, would try to keep the peace, changing the subject whenever things got too personal. I missed the easy laughter we used to share, the sense of belonging that once filled our home. I tried to reach out to Julia, inviting her to join me for coffee, offering to help with wedding plans, suggesting we take a weekend trip together. She always had an excuse, a meeting, a deadline, a prior commitment. I told myself it was just growing pains, that we'd find our rhythm eventually. But deep down I knew something had shifted. I started to feel like a guest in my own life, tiptoeing around my own home, careful not to overstep. I'd catch glimpses of Julia and David huddled together in the hallway, their voices low, their faces serious. When I approached, they'd fall silent, plaster on polite smiles and change the subject. I tried not to let it hurt, but it did. It hurt more than I cared to admit. The business, too, began to feel less like a family and more like a corporation. Julia implemented new policies, streamlined operations, and cut costs wherever she could. Some of her changes were necessary, even smart, but others felt cold, impersonal. Longtime employees were let go, their positions deemed redundant. I argued with Julia about it, pleading for compassion, for loyalty. She listened, but her eyes were hard, her mind already made up. "It's just business, Evelyn," she'd say, her tone final. "We have to do what's best for the company." I started to dread going to work, the place that had once been my sanctuary. I'd sit in my office staring at the photos on my desk, Mark's smiling face, David as a boy, the three of us on a beach vacation years ago. I wondered what Mark would think of all this, whether he'd be proud of how far we'd come, or heartbroken by how far we'd drifted. I missed him more than ever, missed his steady hand, his quiet wisdom. I wished I could ask him what to do, how to bridge the growing chasm between me and the people I loved most. There were moments of hope, brief flashes when I thought things might turn around. David would stop by my office with a cup of tea, sit with me for a few minutes, and talk about the grandkids. Julia would compliment my work on a project, thank me for my dedication. I clung to those moments, desperate for reassurance, for proof that I still mattered. But they were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the growing sense of unease that haunted my days. Looking back, I can see the warning signs were there all along, the whispered conversations, the closed doors, the subtle shifts in power. But I wanted so badly to believe that my place was secure, that my family would never turn on me. I told myself that love was enough, that loyalty would win out in the end. I ignored the knot of dread in my stomach, the voice in my head that whispered, "Be careful. Things are changing." I wish I could say I was prepared for what happened next, that I saw it coming and braced myself for the blow. But the truth is I was blindsided. I trusted too much, loved too deeply, and in the end it was my own heart that betrayed me. My life was in Julia's hands, and I didn't even realize it until she closed her fist. I can still feel the chill in the conference room, the way the air seemed to thicken as I stepped inside. Julia was already there, seated at the head of the long table, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The blinds were drawn, muting the sunlight and casting the room in a gray, lifeless haze. I looked for David, hoping to see his familiar face, to find some comfort in his presence. But the chair beside Julia was empty. My heart sank, a premonition settling in my bones, but I forced myself to smile, to act as if this was just another meeting. "Please, have a seat," Julia said, her voice clipped and formal. There was no warmth, no trace of the woman I'd tried so hard to welcome into my family. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed my skirt. I tried to catch her eye, to find some hint of kindness or understanding, but her gaze was fixed on the folder in front of her. She opened it with deliberate care, as if the act itself was a ritual. "Evelyn, I'll get straight to the point. The company is moving in a new direction, and we've decided it's time for you to step down from your position, effective immediately." The words hit me like a slap. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to tell me it was a joke, but her expression never wavered. I felt the blood drain from my face, my ears ringing with disbelief. I don't understand," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is this about the quarterly numbers? The new client? If there's a problem, I can fix it." Julia's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not about your performance. It's about the future of the company. We need to make room for new ideas, new leadership. This isn't personal, not personal." The words echoed in my mind, absurd in their cruelty. How could it not be personal? This business was my life, my legacy, the last piece of Mark I had left. I thought of all the years I'd poured into it, the sacrifices I'd made, the moments I'd missed with my grandchildren because I was here, building something for all of us. I thought of David, my son, who should have been here, who should have stood by my side. But he was nowhere to be found, leaving Julia to do the dirty work. I tried to steady my voice to keep the desperation from seeping through. "Does David know about this?" I asked, clinging to the hope that he would come bursting through the door, that he would put a stop to this madness. Julia's eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I saw something. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "This is a decision we made together," she said, her tone final. "David supports it." I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. My own son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd supported through every trial and triumph, had turned his back on me. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to beg for mercy. But I sat there, frozen, my hands clenched in my lap, my dignity slipping through my fingers. Julia slid a folder across the table. "There's a severance package. You'll need to clear out your things by the end of the day." I stared at the folder, unable to move. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing tighter with every breath. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant clatter of keyboards from the outer office, the world continuing on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had changed. I was being erased, written out of my own story. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady beneath me. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, to remind Julia of all I'd done for this company, for this family. But the words caught in my throat, choked by a wave of humiliation and grief. I turned and walked out, my footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. As I made my way to my office, I passed colleagues I'd known for years. Some looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Others offered tight, sympathetic smiles, their faces etched with discomfort. I wondered what they'd been told, what story Julia had spun to justify my dismissal. I wondered if they believed it, if they thought I was too old, too set in my ways, too much of a burden. I closed the door to my office and leaned against it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The room was filled with memories, photos of Mark and David, awards I'd won, thank you notes from clients and employees. I ran my fingers over the framed picture of Mark, his eyes crinkling with laughter, and felt a fresh wave of loss crash over me. I wished he were here, wished he could tell me what to do, how to survive this betrayal. I sat at my desk, staring at the box Julia had left for me. I began to pack my things, each item a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. The mug David had made for me in kindergarten, its handle chipped but still sturdy. The crystal paperweight Mark had given me on our 20th anniversary. The stack of letters from clients who had become friends. I moved slowly as if in a dream, my mind replaying Julia's words over and over. Not personal, a decision we made together. I thought of all the times I'd gone out of my way for Julia, helping her plan her wedding, welcoming her into our home, defending her when others questioned her decisions. I tried so hard to be a good mother-in-law, to make her feel like part of the family, and now she was casting me aside, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. The humiliation burned in my chest, hot and unrelenting. I wondered what people would say, how they would look at me now. Would they pity me? Would they judge me? Would they forget me altogether? I felt invisible, erased, as if my years of hard work and sacrifice had meant nothing. I finished packing and sat for a moment, staring at the empty desk. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly happy here, the last time I'd felt like I belonged. It seemed like a lifetime ago. I stood lifting the box in my arms and walked out of the office for the last time. The hallway was quiet, the only sound the soft thud of my footsteps on the carpet. I passed the conference room, its door now closed, and felt a surge of anger rise within me. How dare they do this to me? How dare they erase me from my own life? I wanted to march back in, to demand answers, to make them see the pain they'd caused. But I kept walking, my pride the only thing holding me together. I reached the elevator and pressed the button, my hands shaking. As the doors slid open, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall, shoulders hunched, eyes red with unshed tears. A woman I barely recognized. I stepped inside, the doors closing with a soft hiss, sealing me off from the world I'd known for so long. The ride down felt endless, each floor a reminder of how far I'd fallen. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into the lobby, the familiar space now foreign and cold. I walked to my car, the box heavy in my arms, and sat behind the wheel, staring at the building I'd helped build from the ground up. I thought of all the memories, all the laughter and tears, all the dreams I'd poured into those walls. And now it was all gone. I drove home in silence, the city blurring past my window. My mind raced with questions, with regrets, with a grief so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. I wondered if I'd been blind, if I'd ignored the warning signs out of hope or stubbornness. I wondered if I'd ever truly belonged, or if I'd always been an outsider, tolerated but never truly accepted. When I reached home, I carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table. I stood in the quiet, the weight of the day pressing down on me. I felt hollow, emptied out, as if I'd left a piece of myself behind in that office. I wanted to cry, to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. But I just stood there, staring at the remnants of my life, trying to make sense of the betrayal. That night I lay awake, the darkness pressing in around me. I replayed every moment, every word, searching for answers that wouldn't come. I felt abandoned, humiliated, cast aside by the people I loved most. But beneath the pain, a spark of something else began to flicker. A stubborn, quiet resolve. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't let this be the end of my story. I would find a way to rise again, no matter how broken I felt. The betrayal was complete, but my spirit was not yet defeated. The days that followed blurred together, each one heavy with a silence I couldn't escape. I woke before dawn, the house still and dark, the world outside my window painted in shades of gray. I would lie there, listening to the slow tick of the clock, the distant rumble of a garbage truck, the hollow echo of my own breath. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere to be. Nothing to do, no one expecting me. The emptiness was suffocating. I tried to keep busy at first, clinging to old routines as if they might anchor me. I made coffee, set the table for one, and stared at the empty chair across from me. I wandered from room to room, straightening cushions, dusting shelves, rearranging photographs. Each picture was a reminder of what I'd lost. Mark's easy smile, David's chubby toddler hands, the three of us at the beach, sunburned and laughing. I ran my fingers over the glass, tracing the outlines of faces that felt impossibly far away. The phone rang less often now. Friends who once called to chat about work or ask for advice seemed to vanish, their voices replaced by awkward silences and half-hearted condolences. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn," they'd say, their words brittle and insincere. "You must be relieved to finally have some time for yourself." I wanted to scream, to tell them that I didn't want time. I wanted purpose, connection, the sense of belonging that had been ripped away from me. But I just smiled, thanked them, and hung up, the loneliness settling deeper into my bones. Even family gatherings felt different. At Sunday dinner, I sat at the edge of conversations, my presence an afterthought. Julia was always there, radiant and composed, her laughter ringing out like a bell. David tried to act normal, but I saw the guilt in his eyes the way he avoided my gaze. My grandchildren, sensing the tension, clung to their mother, their questions about work and the office now directed elsewhere. I felt invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. I tried to confide in my sister, hoping she might understand. We met for lunch at a little cafe we used to love, the kind with chipped mugs and faded tablecloths. She listened as I poured out my heart, her brow furrowed in concern. "Maybe it's for the best," she said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You've worked so hard for so long. Maybe it's time to let go." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, but inside I felt a wave of shame. Was I so easily replaced? Was my worth tied only to what I could do for others? Nights were the hardest. I would sit in the living room, the television flickering in the background, the house creaking with memories. I replayed the moment Julia fired me, the coldness in her eyes, the absence of my son. I wondered what I could have done differently, where I had gone wrong. Had I been too controlling, too trusting, too blind to the changes happening around me? The questions circled endlessly, each one cutting a little deeper. I stopped going to the office altogether, unable to face the pitying looks and whispered gossip. I imagined my old colleagues gathered around the water cooler, dissecting my downfall. "Did you hear what happened to Evelyn?" I always knew Julia would take over eventually. "It's a shame, really, but she was getting on in years." Their voices echoed in my mind, a chorus of judgment and dismissal. My self-worth, once so solid, began to crumble. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, hair streaked with gray. I tried to remember the woman I used to be, the one who built a business from nothing, who raised a son, who survived heartbreak and loss. But she felt distant, unreachable, a relic of another life. I started to avoid people, making excuses to stay home, letting calls go to voicemail. I told myself I needed time to heal, but the truth was I was afraid. Afraid of their judgment, their pity, their well-meaning advice. I was afraid of being seen as weak, as a failure, as someone who had outlived her usefulness. The isolation grew, wrapping around me like a shroud. Yet even in the depths of my loneliness there were moments of clarity, brief flashes when I remembered who I was, what I had survived. I would stand at the window watching the world go by and feel a flicker of defiance. I was still here. I was still breathing. The pain was real, but so was my strength. I didn't know what the future held, or how I would find my way back to myself. But I knew I couldn't let this be the end of my story. In the quiet of those long, empty days, I began to search for meaning, for a reason to keep going. I read old letters from Mark, his words a balm to my wounded heart. I started writing in a journal, pouring out my fears and hopes, trying to make sense of the chaos. I took long walks through the neighborhood, letting the rhythm of my footsteps steady my thoughts. The world felt vast and indifferent, but I was determined to find my place in it again. I was alone, yes, unmoored, drifting in unfamiliar waters. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that I was not finished yet, that I still had something to offer, something to fight for. The road ahead was uncertain, but I would not let the judgment of others or the betrayal of those I loved define me. I would find a way to reclaim my life, one step at a time, no matter how lost I felt in this moment. It was a rainy Thursday when I finally decided to tackle the boxes stacked in the corner of my study. They'd been gathering dust for months, relics of a life I was no longer sure belonged to me. I told myself it was time to let go, to clear out the clutter and make space for something new, though I had no idea what that might be. The rain tapped steadily against the window, a soft, persistent rhythm that matched the heaviness in my chest. I started with the oldest box, the one labeled business, personal. Inside were ledgers, contracts, and handwritten notes from the early days. Mark's careful script, my own hurried reminders, even a few childish doodles from David, drawn during late nights when he'd fallen asleep at my feet. I smiled at the memory, a bittersweet ache blooming in my heart. I set aside the keepsakes, determined to focus on the task at hand. As I sifted through the papers, I found myself lost in the past. There were letters from clients, thank you cards from employees, and faded photographs of company picnics and holiday parties. Each artifact was a thread in the tapestry of my life, a reminder of the community I'd helped build. I lingered over a photo of Julia, taken at her first company event. She was smiling, arm linked with David's, her eyes bright with ambition. I wondered, not for the first time, when that brightness had turned cold. Beneath a stack of invoices, I found a folder I didn't recognize. It was plain, unmarked, tucked away as if someone had wanted it forgotten. Curiosity prickled at the back of my mind. I opened it, expecting more of the same receipts, memos, the detritus of daily business. But what I found instead made my breath catch in my throat. Inside were copies of emails, printed out and carefully arranged. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the recipient was unmistakable. Julia. I scanned the first page, my eyes widening as the words sank in. The emails detailed a series of transactions. Large sums of money transferred from company accounts to an outside entity, all authorized by Julia. There were notes about consulting fees, expedited services, and discretion. The language was vague, but the intent was clear. Julia had been siphoning money from the business, hiding it behind a web of false invoices and shell companies. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each one confirming what I could barely bring myself to believe. There were signatures, dates, even a few terse replies from Julia herself, instructing the sender to keep this between us. The evidence was damning, undeniable. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, mingled with a deep, bone-deep sadness. This was more than betrayal. It was a violation of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd trusted her with. For a long moment, I just sat there, the folder open in my lap, the rain still drumming against the glass. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did David know? Was this why Julia had been so eager to push me out? To silence the one person who might have noticed the discrepancies? The pieces began to fit together, each one a fresh wound. I stood and paced the room, the folder clutched to my chest. Part of me wanted to march straight to the authorities, to expose Julia for what she'd done. I imagined the look on her face, the shock, the fear. I imagined the vindication, the satisfaction of seeing her brought low. But another part of me hesitated, weighed down by the consequences. What would this do to David, to my grandchildren, to the family name? Would I be seen as a hero, or as a vengeful old woman unable to let go of the past? The debate raged inside me, a storm of conflicting emotions. I thought of all the times I'd chosen dignity over anger, compassion over retribution. I remembered Mark's words, spoken in the quiet of our bedroom after a long, difficult day. We can't control what others do, Evelyn, but we can choose who we are. I wanted to believe I was still that person, someone who valued integrity above all else. But the temptation was strong. I pictured Julia so composed, so certain of her own invincibility, finally facing the consequences of her actions. I imagined the whispers at the office, the headlines in the local paper, the sense of justice finally served. It would be so easy to let the anger take over, to let the pain drive me to revenge. I sat back down, the folder heavy in my lap. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. I thought of David, of the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks, trusting me to make everything better. I thought of my grandchildren, innocent and unaware, their lives shaped by choices they didn't make. I thought of myself, alone and unmoored, searching for a way forward. The rain began to ease, the clouds parting just enough to let a sliver of light through the window. I opened my eyes and looked at the folder. The evidence of Julia's betrayal laid bare before me. I knew I couldn't ignore it, couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But I also knew that whatever I did next would define not just Julia's future, but my own. I placed the folder on the desk and sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I was torn between the desire for justice and the need for dignity, between the urge to strike back and the hope for something better. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing. I would not let anger consume me. I would find a way to do what was right, even if it broke my heart. As the last drops of rain slid down the window pane, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not be defined by Julia's betrayal or by the pain she had caused. I would choose my next steps carefully, with courage and grace. The secret was out and nothing would ever be the same. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of purpose, a sense that even in the midst of loss, I still had the power to shape my own story. The folder sat on my desk like a living thing, its presence impossible to ignore. Every time I passed by, I felt its weight, a silent accusation pressing against my conscience. I found myself circling the study, unable to settle, my thoughts tangled in a web of fear, anger, and uncertainty. The evidence was clear. Julia had betrayed us all, siphoning money from the business, lying to David, to me, to everyone who had ever trusted her. But what was I supposed to do with this knowledge? What would justice look like and at what cost? I made tea, hoping the familiar ritual would calm my nerves. The kettle whistled, steam curling in the air, but my hands shook as I poured. I sat at the kitchen table, staring into the amber depths of my cup, searching for answers. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. If I exposed Julia, the fallout would be catastrophic. David's marriage would be destroyed, the business thrown into chaos, my grandchildren caught in the crossfire. The family I'd spent my life building would be torn apart, and I would be the one holding the match. But if I stayed silent, if I let Julia's secret fester in the dark, what did that make me? Complicit, cowardly? I thought of all the times I'd told David to stand up for what was right, to never let fear dictate his choices. I thought of Mark, his unwavering sense of honor, the way he'd always chosen principle over convenience, even when it cost him dearly. Could I really betray those values now just to keep the peace? I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back through the years, searching for guidance in the memories of my own life. I remembered the first time I was betrayed, long before Julia ever entered the picture. I was a young woman then, full of hope and trust, blindsided by a friend I'd thought would stand by me forever. The pain of that betrayal had shaped me, taught me to be cautious, to guard my heart. But it had also taught me the importance of truth, of facing hard realities instead of hiding from them. I remembered the day Mark confessed a mistake he'd made early in our marriage, a foolish investment, a risk that nearly cost us everything. He could have hidden it, could have let me believe we were safe, but instead he came to me, his eyes full of shame and fear. We faced it together, rebuilt what we'd lost, and our marriage was stronger for it. That lesson had stayed with me. Honesty, even when it hurts, is the foundation of trust. But this was different. This wasn't just about me, or even about Julia. This was about David, about the business, about the legacy Mark and I had built from nothing. I pictured David's face the way he used to look at me when he was a boy, so full of faith, so certain that I could fix anything. I imagined the devastation in his eyes if he learned the truth, the way his world would tilt on its axis. Would he blame me for shattering his illusions? Would he see me as a protector, or as the architect of his pain? I wandered through the house, touching the objects that told the story of our family. The framed wedding photo in the hallway, Mark's old watch on the mantel, the quilt my mother made for our first home. Each item was a reminder of the love and sacrifice that had built this life, and of the fragility of the bonds that held it together. I thought of my grandchildren, their laughter echoing in the backyard, their innocence untouched by the storms of adulthood. What right did I have to drag them into this mess? The hours slipped by, the light shifting from gold to gray as the sun dipped below the horizon. I found myself standing at the window, watching the rain return, the world outside blurred and uncertain. I pressed my forehead to the glass, searching for clarity, for some sign that would tell me what to do. I thought of Julia, her ambition, her cold efficiency, the way she'd looked at me across the conference table, unapologetic, unyielding. I wondered if she felt any remorse, any fear that her secret might come to light. I wondered if she'd ever truly seen me as family, or if I'd always been an obstacle in her path. The anger flared again, hot and sharp, but beneath it was something softer, a grief for what might have been, for the daughter I'd hoped to find in her. I sat down at my desk, the folder still there, waiting. I opened it again, scanning the evidence, searching for some loophole, some way to make it all go away. But the facts were stubborn, unchangeable. Julia had crossed a line, and I was the only one who knew. The responsibility was mine, and mine alone. I wrote a list of pros and cons, as if the decision could be reduced to simple arithmetic. On one side, justice, integrity, the chance to right a terrible wrong. On the other, heartbreak, chaos, the risk of losing everything I still held dear. The scales refused to balance, no matter how many times I tried. I thought of the women who had come before me. My mother, my grandmother, women who had faced their own impossible choices, who had found strength in the face of adversity. I wondered what they would do, what advice they would offer if they were here. I imagined my mother's voice, steady and kind. Do what you know is right, even if it costs you. Your soul is worth more than your comfort. The night deepened, the house settling into silence. I sat alone, the folder before me, my heart heavy with the weight of the decision. I knew there was no perfect answer, no way to avoid the pain that was coming, but I also knew that I couldn't live with myself if I let fear dictate my actions. I had to find a way to honor the truth, to protect my family without losing myself in the process. As I finally rose to turn out the lights, I made a quiet vow. Whatever I chose, I would do it with courage and compassion. I would not let anger or fear define me. I would remember who I was and who I wanted to be. The path ahead was uncertain, but I would walk it with my head held high, trusting that, in the end, the truth would set us all free. Morning light crept across my bedroom ceiling, soft and tentative, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I lay awake, the decision I'd wrestled with all night finally settling into something solid inside me. I would not let Julia's betrayal define me, nor would I let anger dictate my next steps. I would act, but I would do so with the dignity I'd spent a lifetime cultivating. Justice, yes, but not at the expense of my own soul, or the future of those I loved. I rose and dressed with deliberate care, choosing a blouse Mark had always admired, a small act of remembrance and strength. In the mirror, I saw not just the lines of age and worry, but the quiet resilience that had carried me through so many storms. I gathered the folder, its contents now familiar, and placed it in my bag. My hands were steady. My heart, though bruised, beat with a new resolve. I knew I couldn't simply expose Julia in a blaze of public humiliation. That would only breed more pain, more division, and I refused to let my family become collateral damage in a war of egos. Instead, I would seek a path that honored the truth while protecting what remained of our bonds. I owed that to David, to my grandchildren, and to myself. I called my lawyer, a woman I'd trusted for years, and asked to meet in confidence. We sat in her quiet office, the walls lined with books and the air thick with the scent of old paper and lavender. I laid out the evidence, my voice calm but unwavering. She listened, her eyes sharp with understanding, and assured me that there were ways to address the wrongdoing without destroying the business or dragging the family through public scandal. There were options: private negotiations, restitution, a chance for Julia to step down quietly and make amends. Relief mingled with sorrow. I had hoped for a solution that would not shatter everything, and now I saw a way forward. It would not be easy, and it would not erase the hurt, but it would allow us to begin again, if only in a different form. That afternoon, I wrote a letter to Julia, I chose my words with care, refusing to stoop to accusation or bitterness. I told her what I had discovered, how deeply it had wounded me, and what I expected her to do. I offered her the chance to come clean to David herself, to take responsibility, and begin to repair the damage. I made it clear that if she refused, I would have no choice but to act, but I hoped she would choose the path of honesty. I signed the letter with my full name, a reminder that I was not afraid to stand in the light of truth. I delivered the letter to her office myself, slipping it into her hands as she looked up in surprise. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, or regret. I held her gaze, letting her see the strength she had underestimated. I left without another word, my head high, my steps sure. That evening I called David and asked him to come by the house. My voice was gentle, but he heard the seriousness in it. When he arrived, I made tea, the old ritual grounding me. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once taught him to tie his shoes, to read, to dream. I told him I loved him, that nothing would ever change that, and that what I was about to share came from a place of love, not vengeance. I didn't give him details. Those would come from Julia, if she chose to do the right thing, but I made it clear that our family's future depended on honesty and courage. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I had chosen a path that honored my values, that protected my dignity, and gave my family a chance to heal. I could not control what Julia or David would do next, but I had reclaimed my own agency. I was no longer a victim of betrayal, but a woman who had faced the truth and acted with grace. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. I had chosen dignity, and in doing so I had found a measure of freedom. Whatever came next, I would meet it with the same strength that had carried me this far. My story was not over. In fact, it was just beginning again. The day the truth came out, the air felt charged, as if the world itself was bracing for a storm. I woke early, unable to sleep, my mind restless with anticipation and dread. I moved through the house in silence, the familiar rooms suddenly foreign, every shadow holding its breath. I had done what I could to prepare, but nothing could have readied me for the tidal wave that was about to break over all our lives. It began quietly, as these things often do. Julia arrived at the office just after 9, her heels clicking sharply on the tile, her face composed but pale. I watched from my car across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding in my chest. I had given her the chance to come clean, to tell David herself, but I knew her well enough to suspect she would try to control the narrative, to spin the story in her favor. Still, I hoped against all reason that she might choose honesty, that she might find the courage to face what she had done. But by noon the whispers had started. I received a call from my lawyer, her voice low and urgent. "It's begun, Evelyn. The board has been notified. Julia's resignation is being drafted as we speak. There will be a meeting this afternoon." I thanked her, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. I knew what this meant. The secret was no longer mine to keep. It belonged to everyone now. Word spread quickly, as secrets always do. By the time I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was electric with speculation. Colleagues who had once avoided my gaze now looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Some offered quiet nods, others whispered behind cupped hands. I walked through the halls with my head high, refusing to shrink from the stares or the questions. I was not ashamed of what I had done. I had chosen the truth, and I would stand by it. The boardroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Julia sat at the far end of the table, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the papers in front of her. David was beside her, his face drawn and pale, his hands clenched into fists. I took a seat near the door, my presence both a comfort and a challenge. The chairman called the meeting to order, his voice grave. He outlined the evidence, the financial discrepancies, the emails and transactions that could not be explained away. Julia's voice, when she finally spoke, was thin and brittle. She tried to justify her actions, to blame the pressures of the job, the expectations placed upon her. But the facts were undeniable, and the board was unmoved. David sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the table. I watched him, my heart breaking for the boy I had raised, the man caught in the crossfire of loyalty and truth. When the vote was called, Julia's resignation was accepted unanimously. She stood, her face a mask of composure, and walked out of the room without a word. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the building. The aftermath was immediate and overwhelming. News of Julia's actions spread beyond the company, rippling through the community like a stone thrown into still water. Friends called, some offering support, others fishing for details. The local paper ran a story. The headline stark and unforgiving. Embezzlement scandal rocks family business. I read the article in the quiet of my kitchen, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. This was not how I had wanted the story to end, but I knew it was necessary. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Reactions came swiftly, and they were as varied as the people who gave them. Some called me brave, a woman of principle who had refused to look the other way. They sent flowers, cards, messages of admiration. "You did the right thing, Evelyn," one note read. "You stood up for what matters." Their words warmed me, a balm to the wounds of doubt and fear, but not everyone saw it that way. There were those who accused me of destroying my own family, of airing our dirty laundry for the world to see. "You should have handled it privately," one old friend scolded. "Think of David, think of the children." Their judgment stung, sharp and unexpected. I questioned myself in the quiet hours of the night, wondering if I could have done more to shield my loved ones from the fallout. But deep down, I knew that silence would have been its own kind of betrayal. David was the hardest to reach. He withdrew into himself, barely speaking, his grief and anger simmering just beneath the surface. I tried to comfort him, to remind him that we would get through this together. But he kept his distance, his pain a wall I could not breach. I saw the toll it took on him, the sleepless nights, the haunted look in his eyes, the way he flinched at the mention of Julia's name. I wanted to take his pain away, to shoulder the burden for him. But I knew this was a wound only time could heal. Julia, for her part, disappeared from our lives. She moved out of the house, her belongings gone overnight. There were rumors of legal proceedings, of restitution and settlements, but I left those matters to the lawyers. I had done what I could. The rest was out of my hands. In the weeks that followed, the company struggled to find its footing. There were meetings, audits, long hours spent rebuilding trust with clients and employees. I returned to the office not as a leader, but as a steady presence, a reminder that integrity still mattered, that we could endure even the worst storms. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the weight of judgment and regret threatened to crush me. But there were also moments of grace, small acts of kindness, words of encouragement, the quiet resilience of people who refused to give up. At home, I found solace in routine. I tended the garden, baked bread, wrote long letters to friends I hadn't seen in years. I spent time with my grandchildren, their laughter a reminder that life goes on, even in the shadow of loss. I let myself grieve, not just for Julia's betrayal, but for the family I had imagined, the future that would never be. I allowed myself to feel the anger, the sadness, the relief. I let it all wash over me, trusting that in time the wounds would heal. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, David came to me. He stood in the doorway, uncertain, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said quietly, "but I know you did what you thought was right." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I did it for all of us," I whispered. "For you, for the business, for the truth." He sat beside me, and for a long time we said nothing, letting the silence speak for us. The secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same. But in the wreckage, I found a strange kind of peace. I had chosen the harder path, the one that demanded courage and sacrifice. I had faced the truth, and though it had cost me dearly, I knew I had done what was necessary. The world would judge as it always does, but I could live with myself. I had acted with dignity, and in the end, that was enough. As the days passed, the shock waves began to subside. The company slowly regained its footing. The family found new ways to connect, and I discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The pain lingered, but so did hope. A quiet, persistent hope that, even after betrayal and loss, it was still possible to build something new. The story was not over. In the aftermath of revelation, there was room for healing, for forgiveness, and perhaps for a different kind of happiness. The days after Julia's secret came to light were a blur of tension and heartbreak, each moment heavy with words left unsaid. Our family, once bound by shared history and hope, now felt like a house with its foundation cracked, every conversation a tremor, every silence a threat of collapse. I moved through the days as if underwater, the world muffled and distorted, my heart aching for the sun I could no longer reach. David barely spoke to me. He spent long hours at the office, pouring himself into work, trying to salvage what he could from the wreckage. When he came home, he was a shadow of the man I'd known. His shoulders hunched, his eyes hollow, his voice flat and distant. I watched him drift through the house, pausing in doorways as if he'd forgotten why he'd entered the room. Sometimes I heard him on the phone late at night, his voice low and strained, pleading with lawyers, accountants, or perhaps with Julia herself. I wanted to comfort him, to hold him as I had when he was a boy. But he kept me at arm's length, his pain a wall I could not breach. The children sensed the change, their laughter subdued, their questions met with vague reassurances. "Where's Mommy?" they asked, their eyes wide and searching. David would kneel and hug them tightly, promising that everything would be all right. But I saw the uncertainty in his face. I tried to fill the gaps, to keep their routine steady. Pancakes on Saturday mornings, stories before bed. But the air in the house was thick with confusion and sorrow. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the quiet of my room, David appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and pale. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Why didn't you come to me first, Mom? Why did you have to go to the board?" The question hung between us, heavy and raw. I set the laundry aside and met his gaze. "I wanted to protect you," I said softly. "I wanted to give Julia a chance to do the right thing. But when she didn't, I had to act. I couldn't let her destroy everything we built, David. I couldn't let her hurt you any more than she already had." He shook his head, anger and grief warring in his eyes. "You still should have told me. I deserve to hear it from you, not from a lawyer or a headline." His words cut deep and I felt a wave of regret crash over me. I reached for him, but he stepped back, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I never wanted to hurt you." He turned away, his shoulders shaking. "Everything's ruined, Mom. The business, the family. I don't know how to fix any of it." His pain was palpable, a living thing that filled the room. I wanted to tell him that we would find a way through, that we were stronger than this, but the words felt hollow. I had no answers, only the hope that time would soften the edges of our grief. The rest of the family was no less shaken. My sister called, her voice tight with worry. "Are you all right, Evelyn? This can't be easy." Friends and neighbors offered sympathy, but I saw the curiosity in their eyes, the way they skirted around the details, hungry for gossip. Some praised my courage, others questioned my choices. "Was it worth it?" one friend asked quietly. "Was exposing Julia really the only way?" I didn't know how to answer. The truth had come at a terrible price, and I wondered if I would ever stop counting the cost. At night, I lay awake, replaying every decision, every conversation, searching for the moment when things might have gone differently. I thought of Mark, wishing for his steady presence, his quiet wisdom. I wondered what he would have done, whether he would have found a gentler path. I missed him more than ever, missed the way he could make sense of chaos with a single word or a gentle touch. The house felt emptier than it ever had, the echoes of the past mingling with the uncertainty of the future. I tried to keep moving, to hold the family together in whatever small ways I could. I cooked meals, tended the garden, listened when the children needed comfort. But the sense of belonging I had once cherished was gone, replaced by a fragile truce held together by necessity and habit. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden pulling weeds, David joined me. He sat in silence for a long time, watching the clouds drift across the sky. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom. Not yet. But I know you did what you thought was right." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "That's all I ever wanted, David. For you to know I love you, no matter what." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the boy he had been, the man he was struggling to become. "I just wish things could go back to the way they were," he said quietly. I reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. "I do too," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "But maybe in time we can find a new way forward. Together." The days that followed were slow and uncertain, each one a small step toward healing. The wounds were deep, the scars still fresh, but beneath the pain was a glimmer of hope, a sense that even in the midst of turmoil, love could endure. We were a family in pieces, but we were still a family, and as long as we held on to that, there was a chance, however fragile, that we could rebuild what had been broken. In the quiet that followed the storm, I found myself alone with my thoughts more often than not. The house, once filled with laughter and the clatter of daily life, now echoed with memories and questions I couldn't quite answer. I wandered from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, straightening picture frames, searching for comfort in the familiar. Yet everywhere I looked, I saw the shadows of what had been lost. Trust, innocence, the easy certainty that family would always be enough. I asked myself, over and over, if I had done the right thing. Was it worth it? Exposing Julia's secret, knowing it would tear our family apart. I replayed every decision, every conversation, every moment when I might have chosen a different path. There were nights when regret pressed so heavily on my chest that I could barely breathe. I thought of David's wounded eyes, the children's confusion, the silence that had settled between us all. I wondered if justice was worth the price we had paid. Yet beneath the sorrow, there was a stubborn thread of conviction. I remembered the lessons Mark and I had tried to teach David, about honesty, about standing up for what was right, even when it hurt. I thought of my own mother, her voice steady and unwavering as she told me, "The truth is not always kind, but it is always necessary." I had lived my life by those words, believing that integrity mattered more than comfort. That dignity was found not in avoiding pain, but in facing it with courage. Still, I questioned my motives. Was I truly seeking justice? Or had I been driven by pride, by the sting of betrayal and the need to reclaim my place in a world that had cast me aside? Had I acted out of love for my family, or out of a desperate need to be seen, to prove that I still mattered? The answers were not simple, and I found no easy absolution in the asking. I tried to find solace in the small rituals that had always grounded me. I baked bread, kneading the dough with hands that remembered the rhythm of comfort. I tended the garden, coaxing life from the earth, watching as new shoots pushed through the soil, fragile but determined. I wrote in my journal, pouring out my doubts and hopes, searching for meaning in the jumble of emotions that filled my days. Sometimes, in the stillness of early morning, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and let my mind drift back through the years. I remembered the early days of the business, the way Mark and I had built something from nothing, brick by brick, dream by dream. I remembered David as a boy, his laughter ringing through the house, his trust in me absolute. I remembered the pride I had felt watching him grow, the hope I had carried for his future. Those memories were bittersweet now, tinged with the knowledge of all that had changed. But they were also a reminder of what still mattered: love, resilience, the quiet strength that endures even when everything else falls away. I realized that justice was not a single act, but a way of living, a commitment to truth and fairness that shaped every choice, every relationship. I thought of Julia, and the anger that had once burned so hot inside me softened into something like pity. She had made her choices, and she would have to live with their consequences. I could not change the past, nor could I shield my family from the pain of betrayal. But I could choose how I moved forward, how I held myself in the aftermath. In the end, I found a measure of peace in the knowledge that I had acted according to my values, even when it cost me dearly. I had not chosen the easy path, but I had chosen the one that allowed me to look in the mirror without shame. I had faced the truth, and though it had broken my heart, it had also set me free. Was it worth it? The question lingered, unanswered, a shadow at the edge of my days. Perhaps there would never be a simple answer. But as I watched the sun rise over the garden, casting light on new growth and old scars alike, I felt a quiet certainty take root within me. I had done what I believed was right. I had honored the legacy of those who came before me, and I had given my family a chance, however painful, to begin again, and in that, I found enough. Healing, I learned, is not a single moment of forgiveness or a grand gesture that erases the past. 'Tis a slow, uneven journey, marked by small steps and quiet acts of courage. In the weeks after the truth came out, our family moved through grief and anger, each of us searching for a way to live with what had happened. The wounds were deep, but beneath the pain, I sensed the first stirrings of hope, a fragile willingness to try, to reach out, to begin again. It started with the smallest of things. One morning I found a note from David on the kitchen table. "Thank you for making breakfast," it read, his handwriting shaky but familiar. "I know things are hard right now. I'm trying." I pressed the note to my heart, tears stinging my eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a sign that he hadn't given up on us. I tried to meet him where he was, not where I wished he would be. I stopped offering advice unless he asked for it, stopped trying to fill the silence with reassurances I couldn't guarantee. Instead, I listened. I listened as he talked about the business, about the challenges of rebuilding trust with employees and clients, about the guilt he carried for not seeing Julia's deception sooner. I listened as he spoke of the children, his fears for their future, his uncertainty about how to explain what had happened. Sometimes we sat together in silence, the weight of our shared sorrow a comfort in itself. The children, too, began to heal in their own way. They asked fewer questions about their mother, accepting the new shape of our family with the resilience only children possess. I made a point to be present for them, helping with homework, cheering at soccer games, baking cookies on rainy afternoons. Their laughter returned, tentative at first, then brighter. filling the house with a warmth I had feared was lost forever. One afternoon, as I was tending the roses in the garden, my granddaughter ran up to me, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Grandma, look!" she cried, holding out a tiny, perfect blossom she had found. I knelt beside her, marveling at the flower, and she slipped her small hand into mine. In that moment, I felt the simple, healing power of connection, the reminder that love endures, even when everything else falls away. David and I began to talk more openly about the past, about the choices we had made and the regrets we carried. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he turned to me, his eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "I should have listened to you. I should have protected you." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We both did what we thought was right," I replied. "We can't change what happened, but we can choose what we do next." We talked about forgiveness, not as a single act, but as a process, a daily decision to let go of anger and make room for understanding. There were setbacks, days when old wounds reopened and harsh words slipped out, but there were also moments of grace, apologies offered and accepted, laughter shared over dinner, the comfort of a hug at the end of a long day. I found myself changing too. For so long, my identity had been tied to the business, to my role as mother and wife. Losing those things had left me adrift, uncertain of my worth. But as I moved through the pain, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had neglected. I started painting again, filling canvases with color and light. I joined a book club, finding joy in new friendships and lively discussions. I volunteered at the local community center, helping others who were struggling to rebuild their own lives. With each new experience, I felt my confidence return, my sense of purpose growing stronger. I realized that my value was not defined by my job or my family's approval, but by the kindness I offered, the resilience I showed, the love I gave and received. I was more than the sum of my losses. I was a woman who had survived, who had chosen truth over comfort, who was learning day by day to forgive herself. As the seasons changed, so did we. The house, once heavy with sorrow, grew lighter. There were still hard days, moments when grief and regret threatened to overwhelm us, but there was also laughter and hope, and the quiet assurance that we were moving forward together. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, David raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice steady. "To family." We clinked our glasses, the sound ringing clear and true. I looked around the table at the faces I loved, and for the first time in a long while, I felt whole. Healing, I realized, is not about forgetting the past or pretending the pain never happened. It is about choosing every day to open our hearts to the possibility of joy, to the hope of reconciliation, to the promise of a future built on honesty and love. It is about finding the courage to forgive, not just others but ourselves, and to believe that even after the deepest wounds we can bloom again. And so, step by step, we rebuilt our bonds. We learned to trust, to listen, to love with open hands. The path was not always easy, but it was ours, and we walked it together stronger, wiser, and more grateful for the second chance we had been given. If you've walked with me this far, I want to thank you. I know what it means to carry a heavy heart, to question your worth, to wonder if you'll ever feel whole again after betrayal. I know the ache of being cast aside, the sting of judgment, the loneliness that settles in when the world you built crumbles beneath your feet. But I also know this: dignity is not something that can be taken from you. It is something you choose again and again, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. For a long time, I believed my value was tied to what I could do for others, how well I could hold a family together, how tirelessly I could work, how much I could sacrifice. When all of that was stripped away, I was forced to face myself, to ask who I was when no one was watching, when no one needed me. It was a frightening question, but it was also a gift. In the quiet, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had, a quiet resilience, a stubborn hope, a willingness to begin again. I learned that forgiveness is not a single act, but a daily choice. It is not about excusing the harm done to us, or pretending the pain never happened. It is about releasing the hold that anger and resentment have on our hearts, about making space for healing and growth. I forgave Julia, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I forgave David and I forgave myself, for all the ways we failed each other, for all the words left unsaid, for all the times we let fear guide our choices instead of love. Dignity, I realized, is found in the way we carry ourselves through hardship. It is in the decision to speak the truth, even when our voices tremble. It is in the courage to set boundaries, to demand respect, to refuse to be diminished by the actions of others. It is in the grace we offer ourselves when we stumble, and in the compassion we extend to those who have hurt us. Dignity is not about never falling. It is about rising again and again with our heads held high. If you are facing your own storm, I hope you remember this. You are not alone. Your pain is real, but so is your strength. You have the right to demand honesty, to expect kindness, to protect your heart. You have the power to choose how you respond, to decide what kind of person you want to be, no matter what others have done. You can start over at any age, in any season of life. It is never too late to reclaim your story. I have found joy again, not in the life I once imagined, but in the life I have now. I cherish the laughter of my grandchildren, the warmth of a friend's hand, the beauty of a sunrise after a sleepless night. I have learned to celebrate small victories, to savor quiet moments, to trust that healing is possible, even when the path is uncertain. I am not the same woman I was before, but I am stronger, wiser, and more compassionate for myself and for others. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: dignity is yours to claim. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and starting over is not a sign of failure, but of courage. We are all works in progress, learning as we go, stumbling and rising, loving and losing and loving again. The past will always be a part of us, but it does not have to define us. Thank you for listening, for bearing witness to my journey. I hope you find the strength to honor your own truth, to forgive where you can, and to begin again with hope in your heart. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And no matter what you have lost, you are worthy of love, respect, and a future filled with possibility. This is not the end. It is a new beginning, and I am walking forward with dignity restored into whatever comes next.